Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this shir. The topic of the shir is looking at some of the halachos of Purim, which anyway is a good thing to do, with a particular focus on some of the COVID-relevant details and also some of the unique features of a Purim on a Friday. As per the usual format, I've muted everyone. But please do feel free to use the chat function to post questions if you so wish, and I'll try and address them. And the format of the shir will actually be following my halachic guide that I emailed to the community. For those of you who haven't seen it, I'll post it in the chat group, and I'll post it several stages further on during the shir, also for people who are joining a little late. And in a sense, this shir is really an elaboration of what I've written there. So the handout sheet that I prepared, or the halachic guidance rather that I prepared, really should give you the notes of the bottom line, the summary of the halachic conclusions that I came to. But this shir is really an attempt to try and cover as much ground as possible from that halachic guide and try and explain the background to it, some of the more details of its application, and try and understand the concepts behind it. I'll also try and stay on after the shir and give people the opportunity to unmute if they wish to. At the moment, unmuting is blocked, but give people the opportunity to unmute if they wish to ask questions, but please also use the chat feature to do so. And obviously, please feel free to call or email or WhatsApp me if anything I speak about isn't clear. So the first halacha I really wanted to focus on was Parshat Zachor. Now, the mitzvah of Zachor would appear to be a Torah obligation based on the pasuk, which we actually read in Parshat Zachor. Zachor eisa she'aseh lecha Amalek. There is a mitzvah to remember that which Amalek did to us, as per the continuation of the episodes in the Torah. Now, that having been said, all else is a little unclear, meaning we know the current format of how we do the mitzvah, which is through listening to the parsha being learned in shul, i.e. with a minyan, from a Sefer Torah. That's the fullest way of doing the mitzvah, and doing so on the Shabbos before Purim, which we call Parshat Zachor. But what element of that is Torah obligation, and what element of that is rabbinic obligation remains a matter of considerable debate. One view would take the stance that as far as Torah law is concerned, all one has to do is remember Amalek. This is perhaps a constant state of being. That one of the things we should have in our consciousness is to remember that which Amalek did, and that's it. And the whole process of on a yearly basis, reading from the Sefer Torah and learning and doing so with a minyan is all the way Chazal packaged this mitzvah, Rabbanon mitzvah. The abstract, the Torah obligation, which is just to remember Amalek, is a little abstract, and therefore they gave it a concrete form. So that's one extreme. On the opposite extreme, it may be that all the details are from Torah law themselves. The Gemara, for example, in Megilla, Daf Yud Ches, page 18 in the Gemara, derives that remembering the story of Amalek should be done through a Sefer Torah. Many of the Rishonim understand that this means with a minyan, because you always need a minyan when you have a Sefer Torah. The idea that it should be done once a year may be a reflection of the fact that something that takes place once a year remains at the forefront of our minds. So how much of this is Torah law and how much of rabbinic law is unclear? Indeed, the very translation of the word Zachor is perhaps a little unclear. We often translate Zachor as remember, as if it's purely an intellectual experience of a memory. But actually, the correct translation of the word Zachor in Hebrew may be to mention. We find, for example, Zachor es Yom HaShabbos is a mitzvah to remember Shabbos, but again, we do so through mentioning Shabbos, through saying Kiddush. So maybe the translation of Zachor really means actually to mention it, in which case it needs to be said, and therefore it's possible, as I said, that the mitzvah is actually to do it from the Torah in public, or it may be the opposite extreme, that really the core mitzvah is remembering and everything else is rabbinic around it. Now, the bottom line is that as far as practical halacha is concerned, there is a rabbinic obligation at least, and perhaps a Torah obligation, to read it on the Shabbos before Purim from a Sefer Torah, and this is the way the mitzvah was established. Incidentally, do we need to read the text which we read from Kitzete? Could we use the text that we read on Purim, which is from Beshalach? Or could we even fulfill the mitzvah when we actually read Kitzete, when we have the Parsha, when we get up to the Seuda of Kitzete? Again, all part of this debate. So for example, how much do we need to mention of what Amalek did? If we read the Beshalach story, it includes the vicious and unasked for attack of Amalek on the Jewish people, but it doesn't include the mitzvah, remembering the mitzvah Timcha. So whether this also needs to be part of the reading or not is also part of this debate. So what's the core obligation and what isn't, as far as Torah law is concerned, remains a little unresolved, but certainly on a rabbinic level, this is a very important mitzvah. Now, one of the most interesting discussions around this is as to whether women, ladies, have an obligation to hear Parshas Zachor or not. In our community, our ladies are generally machmir, are generally makpid, are particular to hear Parshat Zachor. Many of you may remember, if you were part of other communities or when you were growing up, this wasn't always the case. So what's the background to this discussion? Now, the first guess one might put forward is maybe this is a time-bound mitzvah, and positive time-bound mitzvahs are not an obligation on ladies, though of course they can do the mitzvah, but they're not obliged to do the mitzvah. However, is Zachor really a time-bound mitzvah? And the answer is probably not. We already saw that the mitzvah to read once a year is presumably D'Rabbanan. And even if in essence to read once a year is from Torah law, that would seem to be simply a way of ensuring that it's at the forefront of our consciousness that we're aware of Amalek. And therefore, even if one reads it once a year, it isn't in essence a time-bound mitzvah. It's in principle a mitzvah which is either could be done anytime or is a constant mitzvah, one of those two obligations. And therefore, it wouldn't appear to be a time-bound mitzvah. So this is one discussion. Is it a time-bound mitzvah because we do it once a year? Or no, it's not a time-bound mitzvah because in principle it can be done any time of the year and perhaps it's an ongoing mitzvah. There's a second reason why ladies should be obligated, even were we to prove it was a time-bound mitzvah. And this is the principle of Afhim Hoyu Bois Anes. They were part of the story. So mitzvahs which are linked to historic events, like Purim, for example, which is a time-bound mitzvah, nonetheless are obligatory on ladies as men, because they were part of that shared experience. Afhim Hoyu Bois Anes. They were part of the nes, the miracle that occurred. The same applies for Pesach, the same applies for Hanukkah. So these are part of the story. And therefore, this was a national attack against the Jewish people. And it would appear that even were it a time-bound mitzvah, ladies might be obligated because they were part of the story. However, this isn't such a simple concept. The rule of being included in time-bound mitzvahs where they were part of the story isn't so simple. For example, sitting in the sukkah, again, ladies can fulfill the mitzvah sitting in the sukkah, but they're not obligated to do so, even though they were part of the story of the Ananiah Kovad, the sojourn through the desert and the miraculous clouds, or the huts that were built there in the desert. So whether this argument is a conclusive one or not is not so clear-cut. Another argument put forward by the Minchas Chinuch, the commentary on the Sefer Chinuch. I can't see in the audience here if we have Jonathan and Chana Miller, but I believe Chana is a descendant of Rav Baivad, who was the author of the Minchas Chinuch. And the Minchas Chinuch argues that since the mitzvah of, the Chinuch rather, the Sefer itself, written by the Chinuch himself, argues that since women don't go to war, and the mitzvah of remembering what Amalek did is an instruction, a rallying cry to go to war. Therefore, the Chinuch argues that women are not obligated in the mitzvah of Zachor. The Minchas Chinuch argues on this, and he says, no. He says, who told us this is the reason for the mitzvah? Who says the reason for remembering what Amalek did is because of the mitzvah to go to war? Maybe it's the value behind it. Maybe it's the message behind it, the concept behind it. We need to remember what Amalek are and what they stand for, this extreme materialistic, atheistic worldview in which they didn't see meaning and purpose and value and direction to the world. Maybe this is what we need to remember, irrespective of the instruction to go to war. These are two separate mitzvahs, the mitzvah of going to war and the mitzvah of remembering Amalek. And ladies, as much as men, have the mitzvah of remembering Amalek, even though they don't have perhaps the mitzvah of milchama, of going to war. Indeed, one can even question the assumption that ladies are exempt from war. There's a Gemara, which I'm not going to go into now, which speaks about a milchemes mitzvah, a war of mitzvah, which is a war of defense, or perhaps a war against Amalek, which the Gemara tells us even a kala has to leave her chuppah. So perhaps ladies indeed are obligated to go to war when this is an essential war. Normally in halacha, a lady wouldn't become a soldier, but when it's a war of defense, maybe they would. So the assumption can be questioned doubly. Is it true that ladies are exempt from the war against Amalek, number one? And number two, if they are, does that mean they're exempt from the mitzvah of remembering what Amalek did? Is the whole essence of the mitzvah truly just about war, or is it about the values and reflecting upon what Amalek stands for? So where are we left with all of this? And the answer is, it remains an unresolved machlokas. It isn't clearly paskened. We have opinions on both sides. Probably it is true to say that the dominant opinion is that ladies are not absolutely obligated to fulfill the mitzvah. However, there is a significant percentage of poskim who think that women are obligated to fulfill the mitzvah, and there were differing minhagim around the world as to whether ladies did the mitzvah or not, whether this was the minhag was to go and do so. What I think is clear to say is that in general, over the last few hundred years, the minhag has certainly developed for ladies to try to fulfill this mitzvah, and where doable, it is appropriate to do so, though there is perhaps a lesser, it's perhaps not an absolute obligation. There is, by the way, a compromise position which is possible, which is that the Torah obligation, which is to remember Amalek, would apply to ladies because that's not time bound, but the rabbinic addition, which is to read it once a year on Parshat Zachor, with a Sefer Torah, with a minyan, that rabbinic addition is indeed time bound and therefore may not be an obligation on ladies. So this is around whether the issue is whether this is a mitzvah on ladies or not. And the halachic conclusion is that certainly the minhag is to go, and it is appropriate to go, though perhaps one can't say it's an absolute obligation to do so. And therefore, for the purposes of this shir, I'm going to assume that given that we thankfully have a large and airy shul where we are being very careful to keep the rules, and participants wear masks and the windows are open, for those who are not in the vulnerable category, for those who are anyway out and about and going to shops and so on and so forth, it is appropriate to come to shul on Shabbos and listen to Parshat Zachor. This is for those who are out and about. For those who are genuinely and consistently sheltering, for those who are not going out to shops and other equivalent activities, and those who genuinely consider it unsafe to come to shul, they should not come to shul for Parshat Zachor. So I want to be very, very clear about that. If you are in the vulnerable category, or due to some medical reason, health reason, age-related, or indeed, in your judgment, it is not safe to come to shul, and you're being consistent about that, please don't come to shul. Please look after your health. People who are not being consistent, who are going to shops, who are socializing and doing other things, should come to shul. As we've explained, this is at least a rabbinic mitzvah, quite possibly a Torah mitzvah, and there's very significant reasons why men and ladies should come. So what are the options for those who are unable to hear Parshat Zachor live in shul? Now, if you have the luxury of having a Sefer Torah or access to one, and you can arrange a private reading, and so on, again, that would be an appropriate route, but I'm not going to go into the details now. Is Zoom a legitimate option? Now, just briefly to explain the halachic question around doing mitzvahs via Zoom, the main point that's really essential for our understanding is that rather than us hearing the original voice or sound, instead the original sound is converted to an electrical signal. The signal works its way through the wire and through the broadcaster and goes through air, and eventually it is picked up by a receptor, and the sound is issued by a microphone in the computer. So can one fulfill mitzvahs via Zoom? So here's important to distinguish between different categories of mitzvahs. Scenario number one, and the easiest one to talk about, is whether we can answer Amen via Zoom. And the answer is yes, we can. The Gemara in Sukkah, Nun Aleph Amud Beis, tells us that in the great shul in Alexandria, which was a large synagogue, so large that people at the back couldn't hear the chazan's bracha at the front, they would answer amen to the bracha by being signaled with flags being raised from the bimah in the middle of the shul, from which we understand that as long as one knows a bracha has taken place, one can answer amen to the bracha even though one hasn't heard it. And based on this comparison, one could answer amen to a bracha heard via Zoom, even though one is not hearing the bracha itself. Now one can distinguish even there. One can argue that in Alexandria they were present in the same room, and here one isn't present in the same room, one's hearing it much further. Nonetheless, it would appear that one should be able to answer amen to the bracha, even though one hasn't heard the original voice, and merely one knows that the bracha has taken place through either seeing the flag raised in the bimah or hearing the voice over Zoom. You know the bracha has been said, and that would be sufficient. Opposite extreme, can one create a minyan over Zoom? And to that, the answer is no, one cannot. One can't create a minyan over Zoom through participation through Zoom, and thus being able to say Kaddish and Kedusha and the like. And the reason is because for a minyan, one needs presence of people in the same space itself. This is very clear in Shulchan Aruch, very, very tightly defined boundaries of being in the same room or the same location, even being on opposite sides of the road may be a problem, and so on and so forth. One has to be present in the same place in order to be part of a minyan. However, we now need to address a middle scenario. Answering amen, yes. Part of a minyan, no. Can one fulfill mitzvahs which are based upon hearing via Zoom? Now, what do we mean when we talk about mitzvahs based on hearing? We mean things like Megilla or blowing the shofar, where the halachic principle at work is shomea ka'ona. One person says, but the listener is also connecting to the words that are said through listening, even though they are not speaking. And they need to hear a real person who is saying something. And we use this mechanism the whole time, whether in Chazaras Hashatz, the repetition of the Amidah, or whether in Kiddush at home, or through a shofar or Megillah being blown or read in the middle of a shul. We're all listening to it. And here we face the question, well, what actually am I listening to? I'm not listening to the sound of the person or the sound of the shofar. I'm listening to a sound, a machine-generated sound. Can I fulfill the mitzvah through that? Now, the simplest assumption would be that one cannot fulfill the mitzvah through the medium of Zoom, based on the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah. Obviously, they didn't have Zoom at the time. However, the Mishnah tells us that if a shofar is blown into a pit and one hears the echo, one hasn't fulfilled the mitzvah. Why not? Because one has to hear the sounds of the shofar. The echo is the sounds of the vibration of the cave walls or the pit walls, not the shofar itself, and therefore one can't fulfill the mitzvah through the sounds of the echo. Similarly, say many poskim, they were not talking about Zoom. This is a shayla that came up several decades ago in the context of a phone or a microphone, but for the purposes of our discussion, pretty much identical. They say that if you are hearing the sounds of the microphone or the phone or the Zoom, you're not hearing the sounds of the voice. You're hearing something which is the vibrations in the membrane of the microphone or the receiver on the telephone. You're not hearing the voice itself, and therefore you cannot fulfill the mitzvah. This is probably the majority opinion. However, there are significant poskim who disagree. There is a clear distinction between an echo and a phone or even Zoom. First of all, in an echo, there's a mixture of sounds which seriously degrades the quality of the sound being heard. It differs from the actual voice. There's a noticeable time delay in hearing it. Whereas with a microphone, you don't have those features. And indeed, Ramosha argues that every time one hears something, one is doing so through the laws of physics. The person speaks, the sound travels through the airwaves, and eventually they arrive at my eardrums, and through that I hear the sound being said. So the laws of physics are what we mean by sound. That's how sound is conveyed from the speaker to the listener, using the system, the natural functioning of the laws of nature and how sound travels. And therefore he argues that we have merely, through the wonders of modern science, found a method to amplify sound waves and convert them into an electronic signal. It is still a natural process of the transmission of sounds, and therefore he is of the belief that one can fulfill mitzvahs which need to be listened to via the phone, or for that matter, Zoom. By the way, it would have to be a reasonable quality of Zoom. If the Zoom is degraded quality, such that there's a noticeable time lag or the sound quality is very poor, then everyone would agree that perhaps the problem of an echo would apply in this scenario. But where it's a reasonably conveyed sound, such that one can have a normal conversation, there's always maybe a second or two delay, but not more than that, and the sound quality is good, Ramosha would argue that one can fulfill the mitzvah. And there's some evidence that this was also the view of the Chazon Ish and perhaps some other poskim also. So what we have over here is a consensus of a majority of poskim who do not believe that one can fulfill the mitzvah via Zoom, and a series of very senior poskim who think that one can. And therefore the halachic conclusion is that one should not normally fulfill mitzvahs via Zoom, where one needs to hear the original. Obviously with the Shofar and Rosh Hashanah this isn't relevant, but with the Megilla on Purim or Parshat Zachor, which is our topic now, one should not fulfill the mitzvah via Zoom. Parshat Zachor on Shabbos morning, one obviously can't listen to via Zoom, but perhaps Parshat Zachor on Motzi Shabbos or sometime during the week, one could arrange a leinig and listen to it. Normally speaking, one should not fulfill the mitzvah via Zoom. However, for someone for whom there is genuine medical reason not to come to shul, such as one is of the view that it is unsafe, or it is unsafe for one, and one is consistently so doing, one isn't going to the shops and the like, one should not come to shul in that case. One should definitely stay at home and fulfill the mitzvah of Parshat Zachor using some other method. What is the some other method that we should do the mitzvah by? So therefore I wrote in my instructions that one should do a combination of things. The first thing one should do is Shabbos morning. So again, if one is able to go to shul Shabbos morning and listen to Parshat Zachor live, that is the way to do so. If one is not able to do so because this is unsafe or unwise, one definitely should not do so. So what should one do? Two things. One should read Parshat Zachor oneself from a chumash, because we already discussed that it may be that the mitzvah does not require a Sefer Torah as far as Torah law is concerned. And in addition, one should listen to a live Zoom broadcast of Zachor from a leining of Zachor produced after Shabbos. And for that reason, on Purim night, we will live stream from the shul at the same time as we broadcast the Megilla. We will also broadcast Parshat Zachor. I want to emphasize two things. Obviously, one can't listen to Zachor Shabbos morning via broadcast, but equally, one cannot listen to a recording of Zachor, because a recording, everyone would agree, this isn't Parshat Zachor. This is a recording. This isn't a voice. This is a delay. This is certainly no better than echo and considerably worse than the echo. One is simply hearing the sounds of the machine. The debate is whether there is someone who's reading the Megillah or there is someone who's reading Zachor, and they are doing so via Zoom. There can one fulfill the mitzvah? And the answer is, in normal years, in normal circumstances, or for someone who is coming to shul, and it is wise and safe for them to come to shul, no, one should fulfill the mitzvah according to the majority opinion by hearing it live. However, for those who are unable to come to shul, and genuinely so, they should read the Megillah, they should read Zachor Shabbos morning from the Chumash, and then on Purim night, we will live stream Parshat Zachor again for those who are able to hear it. Now, listening Purim night, besides the fact that it is via Zoom, has two other disadvantages. The first is it's not the normal time for reading Parshat Zachor, which is Shabbos day, as per the way Chazal instituted it. And secondly, it's being read at night, which isn't the standard time that we lein Parshat Zachor, or any leining indeed. Nonetheless, the minhag in our shul is to do a reading on the night of Purim as a way of making up Parshat Zachor. And this is based on a very old shaila that was asked to Reb Chaim Ozer Krajinski, the foremost posek before the war in East Europe, who paskins that in a situation where, for some reason, one can't hear Zachor on Shabbos, one can do so at night and fulfill the mitzvah. So just to summarize what we've said so far about Parshat Zachor, we discussed what the nature of the mitzvah is. We discussed the obligation of ladies or women in the mitzvah, and we concluded based upon the minhag that the minhag is to do so. For those who are able to listen to it live, and it is wise to do so, that is the way to do it. For those that are not able to listen live, they should do two things. They should read it on Shabbos morning from the Chumash, fulfilling the mitzvah to remember Amalek on Parshat Zachor. but they're losing the component of doing it from a Sefer Torah. And in addition, listen on Purim night, when before we read the Megillah, we will read Le'en Parshat Zachor again for those to hear it who weren't able to hear it on Shabbos, and for those to hear it via Zoom. But normally speaking, one should fulfill the mitzvah live and on Shabbos morning. So this is the issue of Parshat Zachor. I want to move on, just going through a chronological order, Tanis Esther, and just simply say that if one is ill in any way or diagnosed with COVID, even with mild or no symptoms, but if you know you have COVID, one should not fast. I don't want to go into the full halachic details. Normally speaking, before one makes a decision not to fast, one would consult with a Rav, and this is indeed appropriate to do. However, in this setting, I do want to say a few general rules. Pregnant and nursing women shouldn't fast on Tanis Esther, and someone who is has COVID should not fast on Tanis Esther, because someone who is sick is exempt from fasting, and the presumption is that given the unknowns around COVID and its unpredictability, one shouldn't weaken oneself further. Normally, someone who's asymptomatic, someone who doesn't show symptoms, who's well and strong, should fast. With COVID, it's unpredictable. Symptoms can appear from 2 to 14 days after exposure. And for that reason, it's still a new pandemic, a new viral strains. Viral strains, there's a lot we still don't know about it, and therefore one should not fast on Tanis Esther if one has COVID. Finally, Tanis Esther evening, Thursday evening, we arrive at listening to the Megillah. I'm not going to go through the whole discussion already, other than to say the same principles apply, and I'll analyze them in more detail in a few moments. However, normally speaking, one would hear the Megillah straight away after the breaking of the fast. However, for various reasons this year, people may come to one of the later Megillah readings that we are running. And the halacha is that one can listen to the nighttime reading of the Megillah any point during the night, from nightfall, say Kachavim, till dawn. And the daytime reading, incidentally, one can also listen to for any time of the day, from sunrise to sunset. However, the reason makdimim mitzvahs, the appropriate thing is to try and perform the mitzvah promptly. Before hearing the Megillah at night, one shouldn't eat or sleep. We're worried about a person getting distracted and absorbed in that and forgetting to listen to the Megillah. However, for one who finds it difficult to extend Tanis Esther, one can drink beforehand, and similarly, if one needs to, have a small amount to eat. One can have as much fruit as one wants, but only a small volume of biscuits or cakes. The size is that of an egg volume. And after that, one shouldn't really eat more. If one needs to have a full meal, then one should ensure that there's a system set to remind one to hear the Megillah, so as to avoid the fear of Chazal that one would eat and get absorbed in eating and forget to hear the Megillah. One should set an alarm and ask someone to remind one, so that one won't accidentally forget the Megillah. So this is the law this year, and this is the general rule. If for some reason one can't hear the Megillah straight away at night, one should try and hear as early as possible, and if need be, have a snack and a drink. And if one absolutely has, have larger quantities, but reminds oneself. What should one do if one is unable to hear the live Megillah reading in shul? So there are a number of options. We are offering an outdoor option of Megillah reading, and for those for whom this is an option, that is a good route. Similarly, there are various organizations like the Shabbos Walk, Shabbat Walk, and Gift and so on, who are offering to arrange a COVID-safe Megillah reading outside one's own home, and the legal advice I've received is that this is acceptable. Again, though, I want to emphasize that everyone needs to take sensible medical decisions. If one is sheltering or vulnerable, one definitely should not come to shul. Please do not come to shul. And similarly, if you are more cautious and nervous, if you are being consistent and not going to shul or not going to such events, then don't come. If one's doing other things and going shopping, then one should come. And therefore, once again, if one is sheltering and is unable to arrange an outdoor reading or feels unsafe to come to an outdoor reading, then again, one can listen via Zoom. Now, in this case, if you happen to own a kosher Megillah, if you're able to read aloud from the Megillah, then you can fulfill the mitzvah yourself by reading to yourself. So Zoom, again, is really only an option if there isn't another option. If you're able and it's safe for you to come to shul, do so. If you're not able, please don't do so. And then again, one can listen via Zoom, and one can hear the brachas via Zoom also. If one is reading for oneself, then one would say the brachas for oneself. Very briefly, there are 3 brachas that we say at night. We say 3 brachas beforehand. The bracha of Mikra Megillah, the bracha of Sha'os Nissim, where we thank Hashem for the miracles, and the bracha of Shechianu. And for Ashkenazim, we repeat Shechianu in the day. Sephardim don't, but Ashkenazim do, and we have in mind all the other mitzvahs of the day. The after bracha of Megillah is Harov Es LeEvyonim, and this is only said in a minyan, not in private. And the reason is because this bracha isn't really on the Megillah. It's a bracha on publicizing the miracle. It's a thanksgiving for the miracle, which was done to publicize, and therefore was only instituted when there is a minyan. So just to summarize, once again, if at all possible, one should listen to the Megillah live, whether through shul or outdoors or through private arrangements. If not possible, and one can't read for oneself the Megillah along with the person who's reading, then one can listen via Zoom because of the minority opinion that this is a good way to do the mitzvah, but then one wouldn't say the brachas. So this is how one listens, how one does the mitzvah. I want to add another detail over here, which applies if listening via Zoom or listening live, which is what happens if I miss a word or two. This can happen in normal years when listening live due to the gregors and the noise that's made on Homon. This year, obviously, you won't be able to blow whistles and so on, but a little bit of gregoring should be okay. If one's listening via Zoom and there's a reception problem and one loses a word or two, what should one do if one misses a couple of words from the Megillah? So I'm not going to go into the whole halachic background to this, other than to say that Megillah has a unique feature, which is a Megillah which is majority kosher, even though there's some flaws with the Megillah, it's still a kosher Megillah. A Sefer Torah which has even one flaw is an invalid Sefer Torah, but a Megillah which has a kosher, is largely kosher and has a minority problem with it, is a kosher Megillah, is a valid Megillah to use for reading of the Megillah. Similarly, when it comes to reading the Megillah, as long as the majority of words are said via a kosher Megillah, even if minority are said from a non-kosher Megillah, one fulfills the mitzvah. And therefore, if you miss a few words from the Megillah, since the majority have been said from a kosher Megillah, you can say those few words yourself from the Chumash, or off by heart, if you know the Megillah off by heart, and still fulfill the mitzvah. So just to summarize, there is a unique halacha with Megillah, that as long as the Megillah is majority kosher, one can fulfill the mitzvah. And as long as one hears the majority of the Megillah from a kosher Megillah, one can do the mitzvah, even though a minority is read oneself from a Chumash. And therefore, if you miss a few words, you can read it from the Chumash that you are following from. I just want to pause from the halacha to say that I was wondering why everyone's screens weren't showing, until I realized that the security setting on this meeting was set that people are unable to start their own videos. So I've just changed that security setting. So anyone who wants to start their videos, please do so, and that way I'll be able to see people. I was a little puzzled that everyone was invisible. Unfortunately, we had a little security hack with our Zoom earlier today, and therefore, as a security measure, I left people unable to unmute themselves and only able to post on the chat. Hopefully, we'll resolve the security issue. And I realized I accidentally also left people unable to show their screens. So much nicer now to be able to see everyone. I was a little puzzled why everyone was invisible. Okay, so this is listening via Zoom and listening to the Megillah. Now, what other mitzvahs do we have on the day of Purim? Well, we have a number of beautiful mitzvahs, and I just want to work through them one by one. The first mitzvah I want to focus on is the mitzvah of the Seuda on Purim. All I will say about COVID rules is that, obviously, due to government regulations, we shouldn't be mixing bubbles or hosting large events on Purim. Very sadly, last year, unknowingly, our community was hit very heavily. Things weren't yet clear at the time. We only went into lockdown a couple of weeks after Purim. In hindsight, we did ourselves a lot of damage at the time. So obviously this year, we need to be very, very careful with our Seudas. But in addition, there are unique things to be said about the Seuda because it is a Purim on a Friday. And on Friday, there's somewhat of a conflict between the mitzvah of the Purim Seuda and the requirement to not only preserve one's appetite for Shabbos, but also have time to get ready for Shabbos on time. Again, I'm following my article, the halacha sheet, which I wrote for the community, and the link to which I've just posted in the chat again. Now, how should we schedule the Seuda when Purim is on a Friday? So the truth is, as a general rule, one shouldn't really eat a large meal on a Friday in order to ensure that one has an appetite for Shabbos. This is considered a hiddur mitzvah for the Shabbos meal. And certainly as a general rule, this is brought by the Ramah in Reish Mem Tes. As a general rule, we don't eat a meal of any size after the end of the 9th hour of the day, or to put that in different terms, the beginning of the 10th hour or the 3 hours before sunset, before Shkia. Now, how does this apply to Purim? So the Ramah says that the general custom is to start the Seuda of Purim before Chatzos, before halachic midday, which is 12:13. And this is, as I said, in order to be able to eat on Shabbos with an empty stomach and to have time to prepare properly for Shabbos. So the view of the Ramah, and this is the basic pasak for Ashkenazim, is that one should start the meal before Chatzos. Once one has started the meal, one can continue even after midday because of a general halachic principle that osek b'mitzvah. Once one has started engaging in a mitzvah, hotam in a mitzvah, you do not have to have concerns for other mitzvahs. And therefore, even though we shouldn't start on a Friday eating our Seuda in a way that might be detrimental to our enjoyment of Shabbos, nonetheless, once we have started the meal, we don't need to be overly concerned about that. And therefore, we start the meal before 12:13, before halachic midday, and then continue. Nonetheless, one should use one's common sense and not continue too long and not to have such a large meal, such that one will not be able to experience Oneg Shabbos and enjoy one's Shabbos meal also. If one misses the midday cutoff point, then we go to the fallback position, which is the rule in general on a Friday, which is to not start the Seuda after the end of the 9th hour or the beginning of the 10th hour. In other words, 3 hours before Shkia, which is 2:55 p.m. I should mention here that the earliest draft I sent out to my halachas had that time printed wrongly. There was a typo in it and the time was 1 hour out. I think it's at 3:55. So make sure you've downloaded the latest version of this, which is via the link which I've now put out. If one missed that deadline, then one should at least make sure that one starts before sunset, which is the real start of Shabbos. So this is basically how one should do things. One should definitely aim to start before midday, and if need be, before the 9th hour. There is an alternative minhag, which is known as, it's a fascinating halachic solution to this balancing act between the Seuda of Shabbos and the Seuda of Purim. And this is known as the Pores Mappa, spreads the cloth method. And I'll explain how this works. And this is a suggestion to combine the Seuda of Purim and the Seuda of Shabbos by starting on Seuda of Purim afternoon. As Shabbos starts, then shifting it into the Shabbos meal, and effectively it's one long meal, of which the first part constitutes the Purim Seuda, and the second part constitutes the Shabbos Seuda. It's fascinating how this works. So basically, when we're daven mincha, you would then start your Purim Seuda. At some stage before sunset, after Blag HaMincha, before sunset, one would accept Shabbos by lighting the Shabbos candles. You would then place a covering over the bread. That's why it's known as the Pores Mappa, the cover spreading method. And you would then make Kiddush over wine. However, this will be the most unusual Kiddush of the year that you say, because you will not say Borei Pri Hagofen, because you already had some grape juice or wine earlier in the meal. You would then give out bread from your lechem mishnah, from your double challahs, and it would be the most unusual lechem mishnah of the year, because you wouldn't say hamotzi on these challahs, because you're in the middle of your Purim Seuda, over which you're already washed. You would then get to benching, and you would say in benching because it's your Shabbos meal, and you would also say al hanissim in benching because it's the continuation of your Purim meal. So this is the Pores Mappa method, and I'll simply say that it is not really seen as an ideal halachic solution unless you run disastrously late on Purim. And there's many reasons why it's not an ideal halachic solution. You end up with lots of strange practices, including kiddush without peripheral gofen, merging two meals, which generally isn't considered an optimal way to do a mitzvah. The best way to do a mitzvah is to do each mitzvah by itself. The Gemara says, Einos mitzvahs chavilos, chavilos. Don't do mitzvahs in bundles, as if you want to dismiss them as fast as possible. Each mitzvah, give it its own space and its own time. Don't rush mitzvahs to do them all together, and you put yourself in a lot of halachically doubtful territory. You'll be ending up davening Mariv after the meal, late at night on Friday night, because you'll have eaten first. Will you be able to really get a Kabbalah Shabbos with the minyan or not? You also enter into doubt about what this paradox of saying Al Nissim because it was the Purim Seuda before, and say because it's now the Shabbos Seuda. Is it Shabbos? Is it still Purim? But Purim is on a weekday, therefore something you shouldn't say Al Nissim. So it ends up as a little bit messy halachically. And it's really only a solution if you are running very late. So just to summarize, the Seuda should be eaten Purim morning this year, at least started before midday. If not, then started before 3 hours before Shabbos at 2:55. If you're really running late, then you'll have the rare halachic chance to do the Paris Mappa method. But as I said, it's a little complicated. The Purim Seuda, by the way, should be motzi. It's a real Purim Seuda. It's a Seuda. It should consist of bread. And many poskim believe it should also consist of meat. A Yom Tov meal, we know, ideally speaking, should be meat. However, nowadays, in the absence of the Beis HaMikdash, there isn't an obligation to eat meat on a Yom Tov. Purim may be a little different because of the joy of Purim. And therefore, in practical halacha, the ideal way to have the Seuda is to have meat. However, someone who would enjoy a dairy meal far more, that would defeat the purpose. And in that case, they should eat whichever foods they enjoy the most, as long as it is something special and something with chashiva, something with significance to it. So don't just take a slice of bread and spread some peanut butter on it and have that as your Purim Seuda. It definitely needs to be something a bit luxurious and a bit special. If you don't want to have meat that early in the morning, or you are worried it will ruin your appetite, or you just really don't like meat, or you're a vegan or vegetarian or whatever, then just make sure that the meal is a special meal, even if you're not having meat. So this is summarizing the Seuda on Purim. In terms of Mishloach Manos this year, Shlach Manos is an obligation on every Jewish adult to send at least 2 varieties of food that are ready to be eaten. These can be solids, these can be liquids, as long as they're 2 varieties of food. They don't need to be 2 different brachos, by the way. This is an urban halachic myth. But they need to be 2 different types of food. There's a lot of discussion about how different they need to be, if they're 2 cuts of meat or 2 differently flavored meat. Is this also enough? However, they should be 2 different types of food. The minimum quantity of the food should be a respectable quantity according to the standards that would be normal nowadays. There's no particular set halachic share, other than that it should be a respectable quantity. There's 2 reasons, by the way, that we send Mishloach Manos, either to create love and harmony, or as a food, as preparation for the Seuda. In both those reasons, it should be something significant, not just very minimalistic. I would suggest this year that we should think carefully about who we send Shlach Manos to. I don't want to give a fixed measure. There isn't a clear legal or health guidance to it. However, it's not appropriate this year for the streets to be jam-packed in traffic jams and all of us running around doing Shlach Manos. I would suggest people should focus closer to home, to neighbors, and perhaps prioritize people for whom they think it will really make a difference to give, rather than just giving out to everyone. I don't think this year it's right or safe or sensible to just be going around to lots and lots of people. I don't think there's an exact number I can say, or give X number or give Y number, but just one should use one's caution about this. There are 2 other, by the way, I will say that someone who is sheltering and isolating and not going out, and therefore unable to give Mishloach Manos at all, can appoint a shliach, a messenger, to do it for them. So if you have someone else who is going around, a neighbor who is going shopping for you, helping, you can give them the Shlach Manos, make up the Shlach Manos, and ask them to deliver them for you. Are there any other solutions if you are unable to deliver it yourself and also don't have someone who can deliver it for you or don't feel comfortable so doing? So every year there are various communal Mishloach Manos schemes made. And we considered actually doing one for the shul this year, in the end we chose not to, but some of the schools do it, other organizations do it. Can one fulfill one's mitzvah with a communal Mishloach Manos, meaning to say that 50 people all sign up and the Mishloach Manos is delivered to someone? And the answer is probably not. And the reason is as follows: this is a partnered form of doing Mishloach Manos. And probably the way to think of this is that everyone has a share in the Mishloach Manos. Now, if 30 people are sending together, my share in the Mishloach Manos will prove to be very minimal and below the level that should be given for Mishloach Manos. And therefore, probably these communal schemes aren't a way to fulfill the mitzvah as the absolute requirement. In other words, I should at least give one proper Shlach Manos to one person. That's the minimal amount of Shlach Manos, to give 2 portions to one recipient. If I then want to give extra, then these communal schemes are a very nice way of doing it because it's extra, and that way I am sending a minimal amount to lots of people. But for the core Mishloach Manos that I'm sending, probably one should be careful to give out oneself. I say probably because one could argue that this isn't the way a partnership works, and a partnership is a joint initiative, a sort of corporate identity, which everyone is giving jointly, and therefore one is giving a significant amount to the recipients together with other people. But the more likely model is that everyone is giving a percentage share of this, which would be below a significant amount. And therefore the communal Shlach Manos is a good addition to Mishloach Manos, certainly a nice way to show people one's thinking of them and a way of increasing harmony and love, but not the way one should fulfill one's core Mishloach Manos. So this is the communal model. What about giving an immediate member of one's family, like a spouse or a child? So there are no clear halachic sources around this. The arguments against it would be that with one's spouse, there's a principle of ishto kegufo, that in some respects a husband and wife are considered like one shared identity, and therefore giving to each other is almost ridiculous. It's like giving to oneself. Is it really mar bereus? The purpose of giving Mishloach Manos is to increase love and harmony. Does it increase love and harmony? Maybe yes. Giving one spouse a gift is surely a good thing to do, but maybe not. It's not a sort of friendship relationship where giving Mishloach Manos makes sense. In addition, since there is a sort of shared financial obligation, again, maybe this wouldn't be Mishloach Manos because I'm just giving to someone who anyway is effectively the shared financial scheme with me. I anyway have an obligation to support. The same as giving one's children. They're not one's spouse, they're not the same shared identity. Nonetheless, if there are children living at home where effectively they are part of the household, it's not clear that the concept of giving Mishloach Manos makes sense in that setting because I'm giving to someone who anyway is part of the household from the household supplies. So there are questions about giving one's immediate family. Nonetheless, it seems that the halachic conclusion is that this is a legitimate way of doing it. So says the Eishel Avram, and so say several other poskim. And therefore, if this is the only way to do the mitzvah, this is an appropriate way to do the mitzvah. The Gemara brings, Rav Steinbach brings from a Gemara that brings that one of the Amoraim, Rabbi used to give Shlach Manos to his own son, and it's possible one can do the mitzvah by giving it to an immediate member of the family also. So if that's the only way you can do the mitzvah, that's an appropriate way to do it, but ideally one should find a way to give Mishloach Manos elsewhere. Finally, we get to Mattanot LeEvyonim, the mitzvah of giving tzedakah, charity on Purim. Now, I just want to give a little bit of background to this. There's really 3 sets of monies that we discuss around Purim. The first set of money is Mattanot LeEvyonim, which is giving a gift, a sum of money to poor people. How much money should I give? Well, some poskim say the minimum sum of money, which in halachic terms is a pruta, perhaps 5 pence or 2 pence or the like. Many poskim say that's not correct, and they say one should give a significant donation. There's 2 reasons for giving Mattanot LeEvyonim. One is to allow the poor person to have a significant sum of money to buy their Purim Seuda, and the second one is to increase their joy over Purim. Both would seemingly demand a significant sum. In my view, ideally speaking, one should try and give 2 poor people at least £10 each. £10 is the sum that one spends on a meal. That's above the basic. It's not just a sandwich, it's a sort of slightly more significant meal. And therefore to give £10 to 2 people is the optimal way to fulfill Mattanot LeEvyonim. As per all years, one can do so using an agent. And therefore, on Purim, in normal years, people give me money to pass on. This year, we've also set up, you can look on the website, routes where people can click and donate money that way, and I will pass it on Purim. However, one needs to make sure the money is given on Purim. When you give a charity voucher, it's only cashed many weeks later. And the way we do it in normal years when I'm given a charity voucher is that I've already withdrawn a large sum of money from the bank, and I effectively take your charity voucher and on your behalf, donate the cash. It's important that the recipient gets actual money on Purim, and by making a donation online, at least by Wednesday next week, we'll be able to process that and make sure the money is given before Purim. And similarly, if you give a charity voucher, I can make sure it's processed before Purim. So this is Mattanot, LeEvyonim, the money given to poor people. In addition, there is Machatzis HaShekel, the half shekel. Now this is a reminder of the shekel donation that we read about last week, Parshat Shkolim, and that we will read about again this week because we happen to be doing Parshat Truma, when we talk about the donations to the Mishkan, to the construction of the Mishkan. And our custom is we give 3 half coins to tzedakah, commemorating the 3 lots of half shekel, the 3 times a donation is mentioned in the Parsha. There was a donation of half a shekel given for the support pillars, the Adonim in the Mishkan, half a shekel given for the communal sacrifices, half a shekel given as a population census, and therefore we give 3 lots of half shekel. And by custom, we do it either on the afternoon of Tanis Esther or on Purim Day. So this is how one does it, using half coins, which in the UK means a 50p piece. Both for Mattanot LeEvyonim and for the 3 half coins, one shouldn't use ma'aseh money. That's one's normal obligation of tzedakah. This is a special Purim obligation of tzedakah, and therefore one shouldn't use ma'aseh money. One shouldn't use one's normal 10th tithing. One should be giving extra tzedakah. Once you have given the minimum, the 3 half coins and the Mattanot LeEvyonim, if you give extra to poor people, then you can use ma'aseh money for that. If you are not in shul or not able to be in shul, you can just take 3 half coins, put them in a bag, label them tzedakah, and please God, when we emerge and we're back in contact, then you can give it to tzedakah. If you don't have half coins, then you can just use any coin or any note and just say that 3 half coins worth of this should be given as the one's half shekel, one's remembrance of the half shekel. Of course, this isn't the real half shekel, but it's the remembrance of it. The third money halacha that floats around Purim is what's known as Ma'os Purim, the money of Purim, which is a collective name for all the other tzedakah we give on Purim. On Purim, we should try and give tzedakah to anyone who is needy, anyone who deserves it. And again, this is appropriate to do, and it can be done online via our gemach. And for this, one can use ma'aseh money to do the mitzvah. So this is the way to do Mattanot LeEvyonim, 2 donations to 2 individuals of a reasonably significant sum. I would suggest £8 to £10. And every person over bar or bat mitzvah should contribute to it. That's Mattanot LeEvyonim. In addition, the 3 half shekels, which is more a matter of minhag, in which one gives 3 half coins. And this is given from everyone, different minhagim, everyone over 20, everyone over 13, given by only men or men and women, the different practices, whether it's given for children even, different practices around these halachas, and one should make sure one gives one's machatzis hashekel also. I want to finish off by just making a couple of general statements. The first one, and we write this every year, is the quote from the Rambam that it is better to give more Mattanot LeEvyonim than to spend money on one's Seuda or Mishloach because there's no greater joy than gladdening the hearts of those in need. And therefore, I want to appeal, please, to everyone. In every year, I make the same appeal. And this year, even more so, where we aren't able to spend large sums of money on a very big Seuda or on large Mishloach please contribute as generously as you can. There is great need. And it is always better to give, as the Rambam says, to give money Mattanot LeEvyonim. So this is the first thought I wanted to share. The second thought I wanted to share is that in this week's Sedra, in next week's Sedra, we're charged with the donations that we make to the Mishkan, Parshat Truma, Parshat Seuda, Parshat Kisisa. We just read it last week in Parshat Shkolim. And the Gemara in Megilla tells us an amazing thing. The Gemara says that the Megillah tells us in Esther, the 3rd parak of Esther, that Haman offered to increase the king's treasury by 10,000 kikar kesef in exchange for the right to get rid of the Jews. And the simplest way of understanding this is he was bribing Achashverosh for this. The Gemara tells us, however, on a more spiritual level, that Haman was trying to negate the merit of the annual half shekel contribution that was made to the Beis HaMikdash. And because Hashem knew that Haman would attempt to purchase the right to destroy the Jews from Achashverosh, Hashem, in a sense, preempted it by giving the mitzvah of the half a shekel. Now, what's the link between the half a shekel and the survival from Haman's attempt to destroy the Jewish people? So I saw Rabbi Franz, he brings in the name of the Alexandria Rebbe, and he says that the potential Haman had to destroy the Jewish people was because there was a disunity there. He says they are mefuzor mefarad ben amim. This is a people scattered throughout the world, and because there's division and unjustified hatred, sinos chinam amongst the Jewish people, that's why our enemies have the ability to harm us. When we are individuals, we don't have the strength of Klal Yisrael. The chatzi shekel, the symbolism of the half a shekel, is exactly the opposite. Together, we give a donation. Each person only gives a half. And together, we make a whole. The carbon sipper, the communal projects we embark on, like the Mishkan, like the daily sacrifices which communal, are achieved through us doing things together. And therefore, certainly something that we can think about on Purim, when sadly we are mefuzor mefarad, we are scattered and separate in a way that we wouldn't want to be, is we can nonetheless be together. And there's no doubt that COVID has created tensions. It's created tensions on relationships, on families. There's divisions about different approaches to COVID. Different shuls, different communities have adopted different stances. There's almost no policy any lay leader, any rabbinic leader can take in which there isn't criticism, and valid criticism from both sides. One should have been stricter, one should have been less strict. One doesn't want to realize the physical danger, doesn't want to realize the danger to people's well-being and mental health. And we are divided. We are ever divided. We're looking, and I'm not here justifying on occasion wholly inappropriate behavior, but we're looking at others. We're sometimes frustrated by what others are doing. Why are people being so pedantic and so strict? Why are people being so slapdash and not strict? And there's tensions within ourselves and relationships. Mefuzor mefarad, we are scattered. There's no doubt as a community, as individuals, we are scattered this year like no other, but we have the chance to come together with achdus, with unity. And when we come together with achdus and unity, this is how we beat the naysayers, the haters, the Hamans of the world, the Amalekites of the world, who, as we discussed when we spoke about remembering Amalek, have this horrible, materialistic, purposeless worldview. This is how we respond. And our Sedra is named Truma. And even though the central theme of the Truma is Kedusha, holiness, the sanctuary, the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash that's been created, nonetheless it's named Truma after the donation that we humans make. And the reason is because Hashem wants this world to be a dwelling place, but he wants to do it in partnership with us, the Jewish people, and ultimately, please God, all human beings. We need to be the ones that build the sanctuary. And we do it through hard work. Money is a symbol of hard work. We have to work to earn money. It could be something we use for our personal needs, and when we make a donation, we're giving up something of ourselves. But in whatever way we contribute, we're always giving up something of ourselves. We're always elevating everything we do by so doing. In fact, giving tzedakah is one of the most noble things that we can do, because it elevates the entire time and work that we invested in it. We spend a lot of our time away from Kedusha, away from sanctity, away from living Shifti B'Beis Hashem, living in the dwelling place of Hashem. We spend time in our office, in work, online, whatever it may be. And by elevating our income, by giving a donation, we're elevating everything. Truma, the literal meaning is elevation, through the fact that we are building the Mishkan. And that evokes a response in turn from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem in turn grants Kedusha and sanctity in our lives. And hence the Seder is called Truma from the perspective of our contribution. And therefore, I would appeal really, certainly this is an appeal for tzedakah and generous help both towards the shul, to Mattanot LeEvyonim, to the Gemach, but more generally an appeal for all of us to come together, not to be mefuzor and mefarad, spiritually, in terms of our relationships. We are separate and we need to continue to do so for a very, very short while, please God, till we're able to come back together again in safety. However, we should be careful to keep separate for now, but we should be unified and together, because this is the way to bring sanctity back into the world, to bring Kedusha back into the world, for all of us to make that effort, to reach out to each other, to help each other, to contact each other, to send warmth and love to each other, and in a safe way to support and enhance each other also. So this concludes the halachas that I wanted to speak about on Purim. I will provide the opportunity for people to unmute themselves if they want to ask questions. And also, I will stay on a little bit longer for questions. I want to remind everyone, if there are further questions that you want to ask privately, please contact me via my email or phone number. And I want to conclude by the bracha that, Emir Hashem, this will be not only the very swift end to the COVID crisis, and we'll be able to be back together as a community, but also, like we experienced a Geula, a redemption at the time of Purim, we should please God, Emir Hashem, experience a redemption again in our days. Amen. Thank you so much to everyone for joining, and I am giving you the opportunity now to unmute yourselves.